各位观众朋友们，大家好，欢迎收看 JxJ 论坛，由我 Jimmy 妈马健，与我们的好朋友 Jim Noteware 为我们一起来讨论这个礼拜的时事。Jim, what a week!
What a week! Every week we say it can't get any more confusing and volatile than it is, but every week I think it gets busier. So, and every week I am more and more grateful for who I am and the place I'm fortunate enough to occupy on this earth compared to just about everybody else. So
we don't understand how fortunate we are being in Houston, being in Texas, where we could still have a good life without looking at, like you mentioned, the inflation numbers. It is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You said something very interesting. You said that to solve this issue that affects all Americans regardless of your affiliation, race, color, income, it hurts everybody. You said something interesting. Could you expand on it?
Well, I think, it's a well-known fact about inflation. And the United States is not the only country that's ever experienced it. Just currently, Venezuela is a basket case because of it. Zambia is as well. Other countries around the world, even Argentina is going through it for the 18th time since World War II. There's a very consistent pathway, but one of the things that happens is everyone gets worse off. No one can keep up over the long term with the rate of inflation. It erodes every lifestyle. The second observation is the lower you are on the economic pyramid, the more calamity you have. In other words, the harder it affects you. And that's because you can't afford things when they get too much more expensive, and it means you have fewer options in life. So all of that's bearing out right now. And I think most everybody has to acknowledge that this is what's happening. The numbers that the federal government is putting out every month are very real. And yes, some things may be getting a little bit better, like the cost of gasoline at the pump is going down. But the cost of energy that is in other goods and services, like food prices because of transportation, the cost of fertilizer for the farms, the cost of plastic in the bags, everything else is going up faster than the rate of inflation. So that's pulling it up. And so I think this is a nonpartisan or a bipartisan or a multi-political consequence of everything. Now, we can all argue about why we're here, what has caused it, etc., and we can all argue about what the best remedy is for it. But the absolute facts facing us all are pretty well understood and pretty well documented and pretty well accepted, I think. So then it's up to everyone to make their own decisions about what they can do about it. But the big issue is it needs to be solved. And more than likely, it's going to be painful in order to get it solved. That's the other thing we've learned. The US probably has had the most successful solutions to inflation that most any country has had. Venezuela, as I mentioned before, and Zambia, they haven't solved it at all. It just keeps getting worse. The Weimar Republic in Germany after World War I didn't really solve it until World War II came along, and then everything changed. And even England has had a consistent bout with inflation ever since the end of World War II. Inflation's gone up and down, but they've never really turned it off like we were successful in doing in the late 70s and very early 80s. We have to give Mr. Paul Volcker incredible credit for that. But that solution came at very expensive costs. for a lot of people and a lot of industries, and a lot of things changed as a result of it. But I think most of the people your age and younger really haven't known anything else but stable prices until the very recent past here, when things have been unwinding all over again. So again, we've had some experience with it, and I think we're going to repeat the experience of what it takes to solve it. And just in the last 2 months or so, I'm very heartened that the Federal Reserve has the courage and now the conviction to do what needs to be done. But I don't think the broad base of Americans, let alone people in England or in Europe or now Japan and some other places around the world, have really come to grips with what the consequences of all of this are going to be, because they're going to be very widespread. I hope they don't last long. To me, that's a big unknown, how long it will take to get it under control. But it will be a while. It will be, and we'll measure it in months and years, not in weeks.
Obviously, but why isn't neither party willing to do it? And how could it be spun by each side to not have the agreement that you said, that there's common knowledge? If there's common knowledge, why is it that we cannot work together to get these implemented? For example, tell our audience, what are some of the painful measures that has to be taken?
Well, first of all, I think most economists agree that there are many symptoms of inflation, but the main cause, it's a monetary issue. And a monetary issue means that we've printed more currency than the economy can absorb. So it comes down to that simple slogan, too many dollars chasing too few goods. And so there's really two ways to address it. One is to reduce the money supply, which happens by increasing interest rates and tightening up the financial system. And the other is increasing the supply of things where prices are going up. In other words, if rent is going up because we have too few houses, then what we should be doing is figuring out how to make more houses. But one of the consequences of the way the Federal Reserve, remember, it's a very blunt force tool. It is not at all precise. And it goes across, it's like a big, heavy blanket that comes down on everything. And so one of the ways that everybody knows to do it, to cure it, is to increase interest rates. And one of the biggest consequences of that is housing, because housing is very interest rate sensitive, but housing is also, the economic impact of housing is all throughout the economy. It's not just people building houses on site, it's all of the goods and services that go into the production of housing. So it goes up and down the scale. Housing actually is economically a very good counterweight to inflation. However, right now, we here in the US, and I think probably in most parts of the world, we simply have too few houses. And so it gets pinched. And that became very noticeable during the very early stages of the pandemic. I mean, we already know, particularly at lower priced houses for lower income people, but it got much worse, and it's moving up the scale. So one of the things I'm doing is figuring out how to be an entrepreneur to create more housing. Okay, so that's what the economy needs. I aim to help the economy, but help ourselves too by being an entrepreneur. And so far, this business is working out quite well. Doing it in a different way than most people do, but even so, that's where the help comes.
So that's how we could help in a way to battle inflation, also to I mean, it's basic economics 101, you know.
Yeah.
But of course, it's not as easy as broad-based. I mean, there's risk, reward, there's lots of expertise and experience that's required.
Right.
It's a very high criteria to get into this industry.
Right. One of the other concepts, and you asked why can't people on both sides of the aisle agree on what the measures are? I think some people are frankly frozen in the headlights. I think they don't know what to do. Let me give you an example. One of the reasons why it has been politically advantageous to keep interest rates low and to tolerate inflation is because with interest rates low, government can run larger deficits and they can accumulate a greater amount of cumulative debt that doesn't cost as much with low interest rates. But now with interest rates going up across the entire maturity spectrum of financial instruments, not just short term like in the banking system or long term like in the mortgage market or the bond market, the U.S. government is having to pay dramatically more to finance its own deficits. And interest now, just interest on the outstanding debt, is becoming larger than any other line item. And yes, maybe we can tax ourselves more to pay for that. But when we tax more, then that is the reverse of being stimulative. It is contractionary, and it's also expensive. I mean, when you ask people to pay more taxes, that means they have less to spend on everything else. And it has other ramifications. It reduces tax compliance and all the other things. But having said all of that, I really don't see that Washington, for instance, or even state governments or city governments, the people who levy the taxes, I don't see them slowing down. In fact, I hear more about tax increases now than I do almost anything else. So we'll see where this all shakes out. But
they'll be out of office no matter what if you keep increasing taxes.
Well, yeah, but then you leave the next guy in with a big mess. That's what, honestly, that's what President Reagan faced when he was elected. However, it gave him the opening and the political opportunity to campaign on that. President Reagan may not have been quite so successful, and it may not have hurt Jimmy Carter quite so much had the economy been in better shape and the inflation not be roaring so high as it was in the late 70s. So
absolutely, it was. We read about it. You're right. And people my age or younger will not remember how bad it was. Houston, particularly with the oil embargo. I still hear my people older than me in Houston telling me how they bought condo units in Urban Park for pennies on the dollar, for 50, 60 grand. And within 10 years, it's, a couple $1 million, because that's the one time in Houston's history where it literally was done. There was nothing. Market crashed. It was ugly.
It was very ugly. The value of houses in Houston during the mid to late 80s, this is a little bit later then, and it was because the oil crunch, etc. Then it was a few years later after the Volcker experience, but houses fell in value across the board by about 50%.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people walked away from their existing mortgages, but then they went down the street and bought a better house for lower money.
Yeah.
And nobody would have anticipated that kind of cascading effect. Now, what it did was, and a lot of people don't realize what I'm about to say, but it created a tremendous economic opportunity for our immigrant activity here, because so many shopping centers and office buildings were foreclosed upon because they didn't have the basic demand that the owners of the centers, the lenders that had foreclosed, weren't getting rent from anybody else. So they allowed people to come in and put in new ethnic restaurants, new churches formed to go into vacant retail space. A lot of things changed, and that was a silver lining in the cloud. What would I suggest that we could go back and do it again? No, I wouldn't. It would be like saying Germany and Japan recovered well after World War II, and that's wonderful. But I don't think anybody would say we want to devastate the landscape there just to permit them to rise again. No, it is a silver lining.
Amazing. Now, how much time do you think we'll need to even be able to turn back with this global kick the can down the road to the next administration? I mean, it's been going on since the last, 25, 30 years now. What do we do? How much time do we need in this next administration, no matter what party, will have to do it, whether it's popular or not?
Well, the first answer to that is I'm very glad that the Federal Reserve is an independent agency and they can make their judgments outside of political pressure.
And they have recently.
Yeah, in the last 2 months, 3 months, I would say they have. And before that, I was worried that they really were not independent. That Mr. Powell wanted to get reappointed, so he was a little more compliant than maybe he could have, should have been. But I think we're on the right track now. But we also have to recognize that even though inflation is a monetary problem, like we talked about, there are fiscal impacts to this. And really what the federal government should be very careful of doing is not overstimulating the economy, because the irony of this is by overstimulating the economy at a time when there are supply constraints, some of which come directly out of the pandemic and the economy has not yet recovered from, you push more money against a shrinking ability to produce goods. So you have nowhere else for the money to go but in inflation. And for instance, one of the things I think I would do, and again, this is an industry that I'm part of and I watch closely, is housing. I think the government at all levels, it's not just a federal issue, should do everything it can to increase the supply of houses. And part of that is zoning at the lower level. Part of it is infrastructure. Part of it is tariffs. Right in the middle of housing costs going up in the middle of 2021, last year, just about this time, the government raised tariffs on the import of softwood lumber from Canada. Exactly the wrong move. You just increased the price of housing by about 10%.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, the wood prices finally came down this year. Finally.
Well, they have finally come down, but we're still paying the tariff.
Yeah.
What it means is American lumber is a little less expensive compared to Canadian lumber, but I still consider the Canadians our friends. I don't know why we're trying to punish them. And I think some of that's because of the reverse dairy problem. So,
yes. That's why. But from a micro and a macro and micro standpoint, looking at this, there's another way to quickly end the inflation issue, which is have a war, having a conflict.
Yeah.
Middle East, we're out. So now China and Taiwan will be the opportunity to create a something so that it will curb this problem.
Yeah, but as much as we're somewhat complaining and being a little critical of our own U.S. situation here now, I'd much rather live here than I would in Europe, particularly the UK.
Oh yeah, anywhere else,
or in Japan, or for that matter, even China, because China.
Quality of life is a huge.
But even from a monetary perspective, I mean, and that's why the dollar is not only remaining strong, but on a relative basis, getting stronger.
Oh no, it's been getting stronger.
Yeah, we've gone through parity with the euro. We're almost at parity with the British pound. Nobody ever thought that would happen.
Yeah, how strong this is. Yeah,
yeah, and that's really an interest rate consequence. That's really in other words, we're raising interest rates faster than they are. And I really feel badly for our friends in England. They really have mismanaged their energy business and their monetary supply. I think that's one of the reasons why the Conservatives selected Liz Truss, because the other gentleman had been Chancellor of the Exchequer, and some people blamed him for being a little too loose with the monetary policy over the last 4 or 5 years. So, but at any rate, I wish her the best of luck. I mean, they're our best friends, and so we need to hope that they do well as well.
Absolutely. Well, we'll end on that great note that we do live still in the best place on earth. We're very fortunate and thankful. We're count our blessings, and with the industry you're in, with housing, we hope no matter what the up and downs, you've experienced it, you've seen it, you prepare for it, and we'll get better, because no matter what, this is still the United States. We will always get out of it. So I hope you have a great week, and I hope your health and families with you, and that's all we can hope for. We'll pray. And thank you, Jim, for
Jimmy.
this week.
Yeah, and ditto on all the best wishes as well. And I would say for all our friends across Asia, and particularly in China that are in our audience, we still have the welcome mat out for you. If you want to come and join us, take a look at Jimmy and his family. They're great examples. So,
yeah. Well, let's take a look at Jim coming over from Europe. And everyone's doing well, even though they're in a different state. That's why this is a land of opportunity, no doubt.
Yeah, it is. So,
all right, take care, guys.
Okay.
All right.
Until next week.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jimmy. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jim. Thank you.